Hi, my name is Bart.
My name is Lewis. We are two pilots with a passion for history.
Welcome to our channel, High on History. Welcome to episode 3 of High on History. We have been lucky enough to being granted access to the City Hall of Brussels. We are now in the hall where the kings of Belgium got married.
That's right. So we ended the last episode with Adam Hall at around the year 1600, and now we want to discuss what comes next for Brussels. And we're going to do this with the official English-speaking guide of Brussels, Sarah Strange.
Also, a big thank you to the people of Visit.Brussels for helping us.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 3 of High on History, and a warm welcome to Sarah Strange. How are you?
Thank you, I'm fine, thank you.
So, you've been a tour guide in Brussels since 2004. Could you maybe introduce yourself to the audience?
Well, I have been in Brussels nearly 50 years, and I have been on many tours, and I decided I would rather like to do that because the history in this city is absolutely fascinating.
Sure is.
So I'm proud to do that.
Great. So, just to recap, we finished the episode 2 with Adam around the year 1600, discussing the great Grand Place, Koudenberg Palace. And now the period we're going to discuss is from 1600 to 1800. So that's why we contacted you. So my first question to you is, for this period, this 200-year period, who were the rulers of Brussels? And I'm just going to warn the viewers, it gets a bit complicated, right?
Well, on the death of Philip II of Spain, the ruling of this city was given to his daughter by his third marriage, Isabella, who was married to her cousin Albert. And this was a period of great prosperity. Following her death in 1663, various ministers were sent over from Spain because the Spanish proviso was that if Isabella had no children, the authority would revert to Spain. However, Spain was under some rather weak kings at the time, and emphasis was going much more to the northern territories at this point. It was a period of great instability and wars and conflict. At the end of the fourth and last Spanish Habsburg king, Charles II, who was unfortunately not able to have any children, there was another conflict of who should rule our regions. And after a series of difficult wars, once again, the Habsburg Spanish line having died out, we were placed under the Habsburgs of Austria. So our capital goes from Madrid to Vienna.
I see.
And the Austrians have a certain amount of problems trying to assert authority. They have different ideas. It's the beginning of the Enlightenment, and there's a lot of conflict again in the city for this period. The rulers of our time, first of all, we have Eugene of Savoy, who is fighting most of the time. He is followed by Maximilian Emmanuel of Bavaria, who is here when the Grand Place is bombarded by the troops of Louis XIV.
Okay, yeah, important.
Later, because we continue with the fact it's very complicated, Charles VI of Austria sends his sister, Archduchess Elizabeth, and she is unceremoniously removed from the palace in 1731 because it's been burnt down. That's really her only claim to fame. Finally, we get a little bit of order in all this, if you're still following me.
Yeah, we are.
We now have a small war where it's decided that Charles VI's daughter, who is Maria Theresa, and a woman, there's a dispute about whether she should be entitled to her position or not. This war finally concludes, and she is therefore the new emperor of Austria. She marries a man by the name of Francis I.
Okay.
And Francis I happens to be the brother of Charles of Lorraine. And Charles of Lorraine marries Maria Theresa's sister, Anne. And as a result, as a wedding present, Charles of Lorraine is given the authority over our regions, and he does this very proficiently for about 40 years.
That's a long period. 40
yes,
years.
it is. When he dies in 1780, he's replaced by the eldest son of Maria Theresa, who is Joseph II, who has tremendously exciting ideas about centralizing government, building up the civil service, abolishing some of the convents. He has tremendously strong ideas, and he's not considered very popular.
No.
He does make one brief visit to Brussels, however. Under Joseph II, who remains in Vienna, we are ruled by Maria Christine, who is the daughter of Maria Theresa and sister to Marie Antoinette, by the way. The rebellious Belgians are not happy with the reforms proposed by Joseph, and they start their own revolution, following on the ideas of what's happened across the border in France. They are chased out. They return. And then, finally, they are chased out again, this time not by the Belgians, but by the French. So, in fact, if we resume this period very briefly, we remained under the Spanish for another 70 or 80 years. Because of the death of Charles II, we become part of the Habsburg Empire of the Austrians, which is when we get the secular development of the city and the beginnings of the modern state. The Austrians are so repressive in their reforms that the local people rebel. This is repressed. And finally, we have to deal with the French. That, as they say, is another chapter.
Okay, perfect. So the next question I have for you, I'm sure a lot of famous people came to Brussels. If so, did they influence the city or not?
Well, for example, let's pick a few at random. It's always fun to take a few out of the lucky box.
Sure.
We can start with Mr. Rubens. You may have heard of him, the painter. Well, he was the court painter of Albert and Isabella. And he was a very important painter at the time of the Counter-Reformation, the triumph again of the Catholic religion. A little later on, we have Queen Christina of Sweden, who was a Protestant but is converted to the Catholic religion and comes to visit our palace for a brief time in the middle of the 17th century.
Yeah.
Shall we move on a little bit?
Sure.
Let's go to Russia. We have Peter the Great, who who is determined to bring Russia into the modern world, and that's an interesting context in which we live right now. He visits England as well, goes to Deptford, and he also comes here and is the guest of the Marquis de Prie, who is the representative of the Austrians in the Palace of Brussels. And the legend tells us that on one occasion he'd been rather copiously supplied with food and drink and goes into the park and is violently sick. There is a statue commemorating this event, which was produced by Prince Dimitrov in 1856, and it can still be seen. But after that disgraceful incident, now we go on to something a little higher. At the time of Charles of Lorraine, we have a famous visitor. He's only 7 years old. I'm sure you've heard of him, Amadeus Mozart.
Of course, yeah.
And Mozart was taken around Europe with his family, particularly his father and his sister, Nina, and came here and wanted to play, of course, to show his genius in front of Charles of Lorraine, who had other considerations at the time and made him wait. Tradition tells us that he gave him a small little mauve suit and a wooden sword to play with, but he did end up playing at the court.
Wow.
So those are some of the people. Nowadays we have plenty of people here because we are our headquarters, but those are some of the famous people during that period.
So I'll remember Mozart, and I remember a vomiting Russian in a park.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So my next question, Brussels being ruled by all these different nations, I imagine did this benefit its economy? I'm thinking import, exports, local produce. Could you maybe talk about the economy in Brussels in that period?
Well, of course, we are a nation here of people who are in a situation which is under constant stress and riots and very difficult political situation, as I've explained. But in terms of the economy, now this was a different thing. Under the peace treaty agreed with the Dutch at this point, in 1609 to 1621, we are under Albert and Isabella, and this is a period of great economy development, particularly in terms of the tapestry industry, the lace industry for the court. Okay. We have the beginning of some of the glass factories, the soap making, all sorts of things. We're beginning to have new paved roads, development. So things are going very well. A lot of things transit through here. Don't forget that in the previous period we have the development of the canal, which was built by the Spanish. It took 11 years to build and gave us access to Antwerp and then to the North Sea. This will play an interesting role a little later on in the period, but at this time things are going very well. Later on in the period we will have the development of carriages, the famous company Siemens who came along, that's Simons.
Okay.
Also we have the development of all sorts of small industries, crafts, which are now all still organized by the corporations, but now begin to get imports from other countries, with access, of course, to America. Again, the earlier period. So things are doing very well. Unfortunately, after the death of Isabella in 1633, and we are still ruled by representatives of the Spanish court, and the Spanish family in general is not doing so well, emphasis is going to change and the economy will slump. There were a lot of illnesses, there were a lot of problems. But finally, under the Austrians, things begin to pick up again. Charles of Lorraine, our ruler for 40 years, actually had his own porcelain factory. He supported the silversmiths. He did a lot of things for hunting, for a lot of things for the development of buildings. There was a lot of rebuilding after the bombardment of the Grand Place in 1695. The development and beginning of the bourgeoisie, if you like, the middle classes, and again the separation between the local people and the authorities from other places. So all in all, at the end of the period, we are doing quite well.
Great. Fantastic. And then now let's talk a bit about religion. I'm thinking, is there maybe a divide back then between the Protestants or the Catholics? Could you maybe talk about that?
Well, the period is a period of great movement. We start with the reconquest of the city of Antwerp, which is our port and therefore our access to other markets, in 1604. And as a result of that, we have again access to the sea. We chase out the Protestants. We've had, in the previous century, we had 6 years of Protestant rule, but this has gradually been clawed back by the
Spanish.
Through the Spanish, and we have now the development of the Counter-Reformation in full spate, with the development of any number of 6 or 7 well-known churches in Brussels, the Brigittines, the Augustinian Church, 2 Baroque churches, Our Lady of Good Help, and I go on. There are various others. The convents that thrive, they have a new teaching orders that come here. We have the arrival of the Jesuits who teach in French as well as in the local language. And altogether, the Catholic Church rules very strongly here. The birth, marriages and dress are all organised by the church. We're still very much under the yoke of the Pope. And the Dutch, meanwhile, have finally split away from us in 1648 to form the 17 provinces which make up the Netherlands of today. So we have now a smaller part of our land is somewhat diminished, but those who remain are very Catholic. This is still the case today.
It is, yeah. So, given the current corona crisis we're experiencing, my next question is, did the inhabitants of Brussels face any of these pandemics or diseases during this period or not?
Well, this 200-year period sees a great development in urbanization, people coming in from the countryside to work, people living in close proximity. So I have to mention 2 really important events. First of all, in the middle of the 17th century, we have an outbreak of plague. It's the last one, incidentally. It lasts about a couple of years, not too different from what's happened just now. These vectors of plague are caused by waterborne diseases, cholera, measles, typhus, various other things, unsanitary conditions. And it's the religious orders that look after people. It's the early health service, if you like. Then we have, of course, 3 major pandemics under the Austrians. Beginning of the 18th century, followed a little later in the 1730s, and the last one just about the time of the French Revolution, which is in the 1790s, 1780s. 1780s. Yes, that's right, the other thing. By 1784, this just happened to be a date I found, the population has nonetheless increased because we have had a certain amount of prosperity and peace under our Austrian rulers. And under Joseph II, one of the other measures that he introduced was he He forbade people to bury people inside churches. He also forbade people to have cemeteries within the city. Don't forget, Brussels had a city wall at this time. And he set up created funds for schools and hospitals, which were lay institutions. This was a revolution at the time. It was to eventually to end the beginning of this new period when we will be much more secular and much more aware of the problems that occurred.
So if a tourist comes to Brussels today, what can he or she find from this period? Or are most buildings gone for eternity? Or can we still find them today?
Well, under the Spanish period, we have, unfortunately, not much building. We have a lot of destruction with the bombardment of the Grand Place in 1695. And taxes were relieved from a lot of people, particularly for beer and wood and other things, to enable the entire square to be rebuilt in 4 years. So that, of course, you can still see. Now, if you leave the Grand Place, you go down the side road, you can find the statue of the Mannequin Pisse.
Yep.
His little statue was built in 1619 by Jérôme Duquesnoy, and he can still be seen. I might just add, if you're interested, that it is a copy of the statue. The original is in the City Museum. He, of course, was very important in the water system. I just mentioned this in passing. We had 82 fountains in Brussels. These waters were provided free of charge by the state. And it was only in the 19th century we get tap water. So the fountain, we have another famous fountain, which is in the Sablon, which was built and paid for by an emigre from Scotland, Thomas Bruce, and it reflects the neoclassic design of the 18th century. In terms of buildings, well, of course, there's a whole rash of churches built under Albert and Isabella, which were, of course, partly destroyed in the bombardment, but have been superbly restored. So there's a lot of religious buildings here. Only one significant building of the 16th century, the 1600s, which still exists, is in Rue de Rollebec. And Rue de Rollebec has an old house, which is called La Maison de l'Estrie, and that was built in that period. But very few of those houses from the earlier period, because they were in wood, have survived, unfortunately.
So last question for you, Sarah. What comes next for Brussels? Could you maybe tell us, what happens for Brussels in the next 100 years, maybe after our period?
100 years is a little much. Shall we just say that the period began with a series of conflicts and unrest, and unfortunately it's going to end in a similar way, but with different participants. So by the time we get to the 19th century, we have beginnings of a modern state. Joseph II has done his best to inculcate new ideas from Vienna, and these are not always met with success. He does various things that are okay, the secular registration of births, marriage and deaths, the abolition of some of the convents, he considered them not important, the development of various other trades and industries, roads and so on things. So some things are good and some things are not bad. He dies, unfortunately, in 1790. And at this point, the local people decide to rise up against his successor, who is Leopold II, and they refuse to accept the authority of the Austrians, and they throw out Marie Christine and her husband from the palace. This whole period of uncertainty, known as the Brabant Revolution, only lasts a period of about 9 to 10 months. At which point the Austrians return. But working in the background, there is a little movement of discontent followed by the French Revolution of 1789. And the Austrians are finally defeated in 1794 at the Battle of Fleurus by the French revolutionary armies. So now we have a situation where Brussels has briefly been a capital for, shall we say, about 8 or 9 months, and now is demoted, which is very sad, from being a capital to the Département de la Dyle in France. And this, of course, is all going to happen under a rather famous person who is called Napoleon. But that is another story.
Great. Thanks so much for talking to us today. And see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you.